will realize that the bills that have been sponsored by our female colleagues are the bills that touch on the core socio-economic issues in this republic. And I think that's why this House would be better off with more women, not necessarily more men. If you look at the bills that have highlighted, Mr. Speaker, the bills that have sponsored, they are really hardware kind of bills or a conflict kind of bills. But this bill by Senator Beatrice Ogolla is a bill that touches on the core things that a nation should be, and that is about the children, that is about the women, and that is about the reproductive rights. Mr. Speaker, as I support this bill, when you think about maternal health, child health, we must ask ourselves how Kenya performs against global standards. The Sustainable Development Goals have put a target that under 5 child mortality should not exceed 21 children out of 1,000 live births. In Kenya, in the year 2022, Kenya had double that number. We are doing badly. 41 children out of 1,000 births die under the age of 5. And the global average is 38. And so, in as much as we have reported progress in certain parts of this republic, when Senator Roba was in Mandera, the interventions that he was able to undertake using devolved funds improved child mortality, improved maternal mortality, but it is still below the global standard, and it is still double the SDG, which we all aspire to achieve. Mr. Speaker, in Article 43 of our Constitution, we have the economic and social rights. And part of that is that every person has the right to the highest attainable standards of health. And Senator Beatrice Ogolla has put it in her bill that every person has the right to the highest attainable standard of maternal, newborn, and child health services. Mr. Speaker, this bill by Senator Beatrice Ogolla gives effect to Article 43 of the Constitution of Kenya, and I think that it is an extremely important initiative. Mr. Speaker, I was looking at a report by the Institute of Economic Affairs, and they are saying that preventable childhood deaths are unacceptable, and I do agree with them. Many of us as parents, whether it is direct or through proxy as a guardian, an uncle, an auntie, you know the pain of losing a child, and we should not visit that upon our people. And whereas the outcomes have improved along the tarmac, because this is a country of inequality, this is a country of iniquity, where those who are better off always find themselves next to a tarmac, or find themselves next to an electricity pole, or in the past, a telephone line. Away from the tarmac, many people are losing children under the age of 5. And whereas we are talking of 41 out of 1,000 births, Mr. Speaker, you might find that perhaps in certain parts of northern Kenya, eastern Kenya, southern Kenya, the number could be much higher. This bill, if well implemented, and if it has enforceable provisions, should ensure that children do not die out of preventable reasons. Mr. Speaker, where I come from, we have the malaria problem. And many of us have suffered malaria, repeated bouts of malaria growing up. And it's just by the grace of God that we are still alive, and also because perhaps we are close to certain facilities and we could get medication. Mr. Speaker, malaria is still a leading killer of children under the age of 5. And unfortunately, the national government does not have its own budget for malaria. Malaria support in this country comes from donors. Mr. Speaker, I do not want to speculate because many people have said that the national government does not care about malaria because it is a disease for the tropics around the Lake Victoria. It is a disease for the people around the coast. It is not a disease for the highlands. I want to refuse to agree with that characterization because I do not want to imagine that we have had governments that have decided that let the people who lie in opposition areas die of malaria. But the fact that the national government tends not to have its own line budget, relying mostly on the presidential fund from the United States and millennium support and funds from multilateral and bilateral sources, tells you that sometimes the government is insensitive. And malaria, if it hits me today, Mr. Speaker, I could survive. But if it hit a child under the age of 5, the results could be different. Immunization access, Mr. Speaker. We must ask ourselves, to what extent has the national government devolved this to county governments? Immunization and its politics is almost similar to the politics of fertilizer. Mr. Speaker, if one day we will do an inquiry to find out whether we are giving our children immunes or immunity-boosting products or water or placebo, I am sure that a country that can give farmers sand and soil and things that cannot generate productivity, you will be surprised one day to find that we are injecting our children with water and placebo. I do not want that to be the case. And in fact, I hope that I will never be proven right. But, Mr. Speaker, if our morals are to the point where we can fool farmers, where we can give them seed that cannot germinate, where we can give them fertilizer that is not fertilizer knowing full well that it is stone and sand, do you think, Mr. Speaker, if you have sunk to that low in terms of a moral compass, do you think that something would prevent us from giving our children water and placebo and things that are not useful? I hope that that will never be the case. And I hope that this bill by Senator Beatrice Ogola will make sure that those immunization services which are part of child health and newborn health are properly transferred to county governments, and that county governments must be compelled to provide proper budgetary allocations for those kind of services. Of course, I know the national government tends to want to do the procurement, the big procurement for the immunes or for the vaccines. We saw that during the COVID outbreak. But, Mr. Speaker, we must confirm that the vaccines that our children are consuming is not water, is not placebo, and it is the right thing. When it comes to the health of mothers, Mr. Speaker, the Linda Mama program that was initiated in 2013 was perhaps one of the good things that came out of the Uhuru administration. And I think that we must give credit where it's due. Launched in 2013, the objective of Linda Mama was to enhance or to broaden access to maternal health support services. And, Mr. Speaker, the statistics show that as a result of Linda Mama, more women are giving birth in skilled care facilities. I can tell you that perhaps half of us here, perhaps we were born at home. I watched as my young brother was born on one Saturday morning. I was sleeping on that bed, and I was woken up and told to leave the bed for my mother to give birth on the same bed. And, Mr. Speaker, that young boy who was born on that day today is a doctor. And he survived. He was delivered by a woman who did not even go to primary school. There is that indigenous knowledge. In Swahili, I think they are called Wakunga. In Luo, they are called Nyamrerwa. And in every other culture, I'm sure there are those skilled persons, not skilled in the modern sense, but skilled in indigenous knowledge. They know which plant to use when you have a boil. And they'll get some plants, they'll squeeze them or boil them, apply it on the boil, and, Mr. Speaker, within 2 or 3 days, that boil will burst. They know what to use for respiratory problems for children. So, Speaker, a lot of children nowadays, because of climate change and the degraded environment, are born with serious respiratory problems. Those women without schooling, without KCP or KCSE certificates, would boil some concoction in a pot and cover us, and we would be subjected to that, and it would heal. And it would not just heal, but cure those kind of problems. We saw it when COVID came, that those things that those women used to do for us back in the days became now the new norm when it came to the COVID pandemic. They would take trees like the neem tree, mwarubaine, and boil it. And as bitter as it was, Mr. Speaker, when you drank that mwarubaine, it would flush out the diseases. How do we incorporate that indigenous knowledge into our mainstream health interventions? The community health workers, Mr. Speaker, that the President launched previously, not too long ago, the program that this Senate passed a legislative framework to support. Mr. Speaker, these community health workers cannot really fit in the shoes of those traditional women, those health attendants, those midwives who were able to help my mother give birth to a doctor today. Because there's a curriculum, there's some training, there's some knowledge, you have to be trained on a few things, but we must find a way of integrating those indigenous knowledge holders within the modern structures. Mr. Speaker, even if we go to the top of the pyramid, when it comes to childcare, we know that those experts who are trained to deal with issues of children are called pediatricians. So, Speaker, pediatricians take care of children, and I would be very happy to be informed by the senator for Kakamega because he's a medical expert, whereas gynecologists take care of the women. I'm not very sure who takes care of the men when it comes to reproductive issues. Because, Mr. Speaker, if you told me as a man to go and see a gynecologist, I would be a bit hesitant. I hope that there are gynecologists who can take care of problems that men have. But I am sure that pediatricians take care of children. If you look at the number of pediatricians in this country and compare with the number of children that we have, the ratio is completely imbalanced. And further, Mr. Speaker, we do not have a national pediatric institution. What we have in this country is Gertrude's. And Gertrude's has been around. It is a non-profit, and they provide very good services. But it cannot then have the soul, it cannot have the DNA that you need out of a national pediatric referral institution. Mr. Speaker, this House must move a motion and make a resolution that this country must have a national institution dedicated to children, a national pediatric facility. Other countries have done it. We've got Kenyatta National Referral Hospital specializing in everything and about anything, but we need to have an institution that specializes just in childcare. For example, what Gertrude's has done, but with the support from public coffers. Mr. Speaker, if someone has gone to school for 6 years, become an intern, become specialized as a pediatrician, why should we begrudge those people their salary? Why should we begrudge them their pay? Mr. Speaker, advocates today are charging 10,000 shillings for a letter because it's regulated by the remuneration orders, advocate remuneration orders. We have seen even members of this House, charging 1 billion shillings for legal services. And it is justified, and it is justifiable, as long as you are complying with the Act, and as long as you have gone through taxation. We have seen impending bills of counties, Mr. Speaker, bills of 1 billion owing to legal professionals. And we are saying we cannot begrudge advocates their fees. They are professionals. They are regulated. Mr. Speaker, today the richest people in the world are software merchants. They are making billions out of software. Why should we feel bad when doctors are asking to be paid something that is proportional to the amount of time that they spent in school? And Mr. Speaker, we should resolve that if the government cannot find money to pay the doctors, we should be willing as members of parliament and members of county assembly to forego our earnings so that it can go to those doctors and health workers. Mr. Speaker, in some countries that we have visited,